early because I sort of figured that some of the things that earlier speakers might have said would probably double up with mine, so I've given me a chance to sort of, get the brain ticking in a maybe slightly different direction. Although this was the topic, the role of the board in a startup not-for-profit, I added the other thing is getting it right the first time. It's not a bad idea if you can get there. I think, for me, it's really about discovering what the purpose of life is. So a little bit tongue-in-cheek there, or at least what's the purpose of the board? Right, so if you actually don't know what you're there for and you're not quite sure how it's going to roll out, then we've got troubles. So somebody mentioned earlier, I think it might have been Steph, more or less implied that really if you don't have your own purpose in life sorted, if you don't really know what you're on about and sort of where you're travelling, you could be joining the wrong board. So you want to get some sort of consonance between what you're doing in your life and what the board is that you're on. And so I've had an experience over my time where very early on, for example, my wife and I decided that there was room for a different sort of schooling system, at least in our area, that there are a lot of kids out there that actually didn't travel too well in the normal education environment, so we started up a community school. That took us about 3 years with a whole lot of other people and the rest of it. So it was very clear what that purpose was, and it was very clear that's what we wanted to do, so we were part of that board. That school was set up way back in 1980, and it's still going. So we're really happy with the fact that there's been a whole lot of people that otherwise would have had some level of dysfunction, we expect, in their lives, that have had a level of function that is better than what they might have had. Then I was actually invited onto the board of an organisation that was a not-for-profit in the learning and development area, and they'd been funded forever, 95% by federal government, and that was fine, except for about 2 years later, the government decided to pull stuff and said, in 3 years' time, you're going to have nothing. So somehow or another, I ended up being the CEO with the job of actually, getting that board, getting that organisation into a situation where we're actually funded ourselves. That took a while, but we managed to do that. But we knew what the purpose was. We knew what we were doing. I was happy to align with that. So I think, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, line that up. Just be who you are as a board. I know some people say, look, boards have got all these structures, they've got to have passion, got to have this, got to have that. But when you get your group together, you'll find that there are things in there that are really a common thread. So just be who you are. Don't try to be like another board. Listen to what other boards do and say and how they operate and all that sort of gear. But just be mindful that it's you. It's your board, and every other board's taken, basically. So just sort that one through. So how do you do that? Well, we do that by doing an awful lot of talk. So in the board that we're on now, the Sanford Commons board, for example, probably should go back a little bit. Sanford Commons sounds like an odd thing. You may have searched it, may know a little bit more about it. But in our little community, which is about 20 k's out of Brisbane, it's a community in a valley. It's about 10,000 people across 20 k's, semi-rural sort of environment. We had a big event happen out there about 7 or 8 years ago, and that is that a large developer decided they wanted to put a supermarket right in the middle of our little village. We actually already had a supermarket, so we didn't actually need a second one. So we mounted a bit of a campaign, and eventually it was Woolies, by the way, just in case you're wondering. Yeah, it took 4 years, but they sort of left town, which was fairly significant. We found out significant nationally. We didn't realise that hadn't ever happened before. They usually win. So what it did trigger for us, though, in our community was, well, if you wait long enough, somebody will make a decision for you. So rather than wait, so we had this little byline that was around future making, not future waiting. So people got that without having to have it explained. So we mounted a process actually ended up being called Sanford Futures, which is where we spent 3 years actually just asking 3 simple questions of people in our community to try to derive what it is that we wanted out of our community. And one of the things that popped up out of that was we wanted to utilise a local space that was owned by the council, an old CSIRO research station, by the way, chamfer boards, just as you expect, 70-year-old buildings, 7.5 acres, 3,500 square metres of built space not being used. A few of us decided that there was time for a social enterprise called Sanford Commons, which actually looked on this space as a space for modelling and showing how to live, work and play sustainably. So we're in the middle of doing that right now, so any help you can give on that later on will be nicely sorted. But what it meant was that we did know what our purpose was, and we did know that they had 3 years of people in that community saying this is a good idea. It wasn't just us, even though there were quite a few people that actually got the energy up to be involved in that. And we have actually sat down and talked about this stuff. So, our board meetings are held in a little room in the back of the tennis club down in the local village. It's not unusual we don't organise for food, but somebody always brings food, whether it's hot chips or whether it's a few bottles of wine or whatever it is. So it's very unboard-like in the sense of corporate board. But who do we have on our board? Well, we have, somebody who's a senior risk manager for Ernst Young. He's on our board. We've got another person who's an organisational development person for CSIRO, does a whole lot of developmental work. We've got a guy who's an agricultural science teacher at the local high school. We've got a variety of people. My own background is out of education and community development and a few other things. And so those people have come together from disparate backgrounds, but all with knowing what it is that they're there for. And as a board, we're just developing our own culture as we go. So we're the red line there. We're meandering our way in a way that we're comfortable with. And there's others doing their thing out there. Fine, that's cool. And we're very big on partnerships, I have to say. So in terms of getting the work done that we need to get done, we've formally signed up actually about 14 local groups and a couple of other corporates not to give money. It's not actually about money for us. I mean, it is, but overtly at the beginning, it's actually more around, are you signed on to this idea? And so the signing on, of course, takes a lot of time. I'll get to that a little bit later about how we try to work on that. So be who you are. Decide what impact it is that you really want. So if what you wanted to do was working, what would that look like in 5 years' time? So if you don't have an answer to that question, I'd say have a bit of a think about that one. It will be different anyway, even if you're quite defined now, but it's not a bad idea to try and figure out just what that might be. We've got a bit of an idea in our place what that will be. What's the ethical basis for that? So sort out what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, doing it right, I guess. That might seem like a rather normal thing to say, I suppose, but we've got a lot of ideas about how we're going to use our particular site. 3 social enterprises have come out of that Sanford Futures process. All of us are actually helping this activity to happen on the one site within the community. What it's done is it's drawn people out of the woodwork. So on a weekly basis, we would get at least one business enterprise from our little town or from somewhere close by who wants to do something on that site. So last week, it was a $2 million activity to put a small-scale retail thing in the premises. It would actually fit. But we've got to sort out whether or not that's what we do, go to the earliest comer, or whether we go out, call expressions of interest, do it so everybody's got a fair option on putting ideas into place in this space that we've got. The week before, it was a $20 million proposal for a health and wellbeing centre. Not funded. They were hoping we might help them do that. But what's happened is that for us, we've got to decide whether the core purpose that we're on about is going to be met by the broad cross-section of ideas that are coming through, and how do we actually manage those decisions in a way that's ethical and meet our sustainability guidelines, which are probably the strongest guidelines that are underpinning what we're doing. Know the what and the how, what you want to do. So, talk here about a board. What we did was we got some people in, apart from the ones on our own board who know about developing strategy, sort out, the purpose in life, sort out, I suppose, the ways of getting there. And for us, one of the big things was to work with a collective. In working with that collective, we discovered, and we had been told right from the start, and our own experience was, get your governance stuff right. Because people who actually may want to fund you or be involved with you will ask those questions, not least of which you actually need to have your governance right anyway, so full stop. And so we were a bit fortunate. We've got some people there that they earn their living out of putting governance stuff into place. So we're very well sort of versed on that. But what we actually have a group that works on governance and culture. All right? So George actually from CSRO sort of manages that process. And so we just do a whole lot of things that are really around that inclusion process. So governance is one thing about getting it right legally and all your compliance bits and pieces. But really in the end, that should just be the minimum requirement. That's just the lowest part of what you need to do. You know, the way we govern, the way we interact with others, the way we sign people up, the way we actually interact with them to get those things to happen, they're the governance processes as well. They're the things that we need to make it clear what our roles and responsibilities are on the board and move on from there. The Ricky Martin factors. I don't know whether you watch The Voice or not, but I thought I'd chuck this one in the middle anyway. I come to like him actually. He's a guy, he's not in my age group, you might have noticed, but he's very passionate about his thing. And he's also about, you know, I don't watch it all the time, but I don't mind declaring it that I could, that he's on about tone. And I sort of think, yeah, okay, I'm sitting there listening to him make these comments and quite excited about his passion about all that. And he talks about the tone of you. So I think as a board, really, what's your rep? What's your reputation in your community, in your network? You know, so you ought to be passionate, otherwise you wouldn't be there. But what's actually, do people feel like you really want to hear from them? Do they really feel you want to work with them? Is the way you present yourself the way you want to be presented? It's really difficult to get that. You can't almost copy anybody else. But what that means is for us on our board, we just love being in each other's company. So when we talk with each other, it's a whole lot of hard-nosed stuff gets talked about, but nobody sort of takes offence. In fact, we would take offence if somebody didn't ask a question that they should, because the role on the board is to ask that question that's in your head, that you're thinking maybe I shouldn't because it's not the right question, or maybe it's a silly question. Your responsibility, in my mind, is more than anything else, is to make sure the question that you've got or the insight you've got gets on the table. That's your job. If you're not doing that, you're really disrespecting the other people on your board. No, I've never had to say that on our board here, but I've actually occasionally say that in my consulting work with businesses that I work with. People get intimidated by others in their group. Well, so why would you allow that to happen? Why wouldn't you ask your question? This is for me. And so I'm thinking, how do we do that? So Archimedes' process, I think there's another name for it, but I couldn't find it properly. But Archimedes once said, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum to put it on and a place for me to stand, and we can shift the world. So I really believe that. I think process, the way you go about stuff, there is no limit to what you can do. You've heard stories about it already today from people who've done that. So my question really is, you know the world you're trying to shift, you've defined that already. You probably know the fulcrum, you know sort of the base for that. You've got to figure out what your lever is. Is it long enough yet? And if it's not long enough, what's the extra length you need? No answers to that, by the way. I just thought I'd ask the question, put the point to you. Okay, the other thing is that, and this is quite different to your role, this is all about what goes on in our heads, which I sort of, in my real work, I have to give attention to this, and I found out I have to give attention to myself as a human being, but there's a bit of stuff out there which is outside of passion, it's outside of what we know psychologically, it's outside of our knowledge stuff, outside of our insight. It's what the neuroscientists know how we respond. And it's sort of intriguing because when I did a bit of research around that, you know those times when you've been doing things for half your life and you just think intuitively that seems like a really good thing to do, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And then you find somebody who's done some research which actually proves that, and you say, gee, he's a smart guy, you know, he's discovered that. Well, there's a guy called Stephen Rock, David Rock, neuroscientist. Have a look. He's got a little model that I'm just going to talk about because I've found it really, really useful as a method for me checking off how I actually and how we as a board work with ourselves and also with the community. So I've called it Get the Fracks Right. It's actually, he's got a model called SCARF, S-C-A-R-F, but I like it the other way around. So it's about what's in your mind. We all actually respond to these things. I'm going to ask you these questions because I think it's time for you each to actually say something collectively here. So you ready for that? So the first thing is people respond to fairness. They also respond to unfairness. So treat them fair and they'll engage and commit. Right? So what's a thing that you've done just recently where you've demonstrated fairness in the way you've operated within your group or within your community? It's a rhetorical question. I don't want you to sprout it out. I didn't even mean to say that, but it's a sprout conference. But maybe you could. Okay. So what happens to you? How do you respond yourself? If you're treated unfairly, what do you do? Well, in a board or in a community, you've got a few options, haven't you? You can just withdraw. So, well, I really want to... They're not telling me all the stuff that I need to know. They're telling other people that, but they're not telling me, so there's not equal opportunity to find stuff out. That's not fair. Or I go to meetings and only 5 people get to speak and the other 48 don't. That's unfairness, right? So there's little things that we do or don't do. So let's figure out what the fairness things are in our board and in our community or in your constituency that maybe you could be doing better, because it doesn't matter about motivations, it doesn't matter about passion, it doesn't matter about personality. Our brains are actually wired that if we feel unfairness, we respond in a negative way. So the neuroscientists say that if you're treated fairly, you're more likely to attribute to the idea that's actually being flavoured at the time. All right? So if you're out there talking about that stuff and you're genuinely doing that, people will respond. Relatedness, get on the same page. So we spend a lot of time on this. We have board meetings once a month, but we have members meetings once a month. We spend an awful lot of time on talking about what it is that we're talking about. So if we're out there in the community about all this, what are we saying? Are we on the same page? And sometimes you can assume you're all on the same page and you discover that you're not. And if that happens in a public arena, then there's major issues around that, particularly if you're trying to get widespread support from the community. The other one is autonomy. And again, it's in your board, but also in your community. And it's a very strong belief from us, indeed, one of the purposes for Sanford Commons is that, and understanding is that we all want some level of control over our own lives, and we don't respond very well when we have limited control. So if we're in an environment where we feel we have some capacity to manage, either on your board or in your community, then we are more likely to engage. Of course, Sir Zelman Cowen's famous quote, that freedom, stops at the tip of somebody else's nose. Freedom to swing your arm stops at the tip of somebody else's nose. And so that's again in a community where you're trying to get your ideas up and running and out forward. People want to know that you're not going to interfere with them. So, for example, in Sanford, the precinct that we're looking at is a few hundred metres out of the village. There are a lot of village businesses that are probably going to feel a little bit impacted by what we're going to do. So we're spending a lot of time with village businesses, engaging them in the process, actually making sure that there'll be nothing of commercial value operating out of our precinct without their involvement. And we're not just doing that to be good guys. We're doing that because I guess if the reverse was happening to us, we'd want somebody to do that with us. And besides which, we're all in the same community together. We really need to cooperate. And the other thing is, it's a bit unfortunate this, because detractors from your ideas will play on this part. All right? So our brain responds. If we're certain about something, we will spend energy on it. If we're uncertain about it, we will not spend energy on it. It's actually a physiological fact with our brain. So tricky business. because sometimes you're not actually sure about whether you can do what you want to do, but you've got to make it sound like you're sure. And Steph did that. Reece did that. You know, sort of you get it out there. Make sure people know about it. If you're not sure, talk sure. And really, as I said, after all, thinking and talking is just action and rehearsal. So the more you talk and think about it, the more likely you are actually to do it. But I wouldn't be underestimating that there, because it might be so clear your good idea in your mind and your board's mind about what you're doing, but other people haven't yet got that. And if you think about it for yourself now, if you're trying to engage other people, whether it's in your local P&C, local school, local sporting club, in doing something, and they feel that it's really unlikely that it will happen, what their brain actually does, it turns onto stuff that they know is more certain. So they'll spend their time on the church choir that they are actually in and which they're actually singing at next week, or they'll spend their time on the fact that they're going to actually go for a picnic on the Sunday. They won't spend time on something where it's actually unsure about whether this is going to happen. So in our situation with Sanford Commons, big idea. When we first thought of the idea of approaching council, we're only asking council, after all, to give us a $3.5 million property for nothing and 3,500 square metres of space in probably one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in South East Queensland. So it was not really a big thing that we were asking them, so a little bit of sarcasm does creep in occasionally. So people said, you have got to be nuts. Fortunately, they said the same thing 2 years earlier when they said, you will never stop Woolies. They always get their way. So that was a red rag to a bull for a few of us. So fortunately, that was the certainty principle kicked in there, didn't it? People thought, oh, actually, these guys were actually right a couple of years ago. There's maybe a chance this, maybe a chance that. So when we got unanimous agreement from all 11 councillors to give in principle agreement to using the site for a community group that had not yet actually been formed, we formed as a company limited by guarantee very soon after. That was a big thing. So that's enabled the certainty principle to kick in. So that's why people keep coming through with new ideas. And I guess what we've tried to do is just keep reinforcing that. So success breeds success. And do it at the small scale. So we reinforce it through a big social media program that we've got. And we reinforce it through our local little paper that's owned by the local Progress Association. But we also do the thing that I think Steph might have mentioned earlier about acknowledging good stuff and reinforcing things and celebrating. Just the other night we had a meeting of all of our members. We thought, there's always new members there, so how do we actually keep introducing them so it's not the same old thing? So we just did a 10-minute thing, which was really nice. So it was as if to say, so what's your name? Janine. So if I don't know Janine, but I'll just invent Janine. My role on the night was to say, look, Janine, I'd really like to thank you for doing all that fantastic graphic design work you've done. You've done it for free for a couple of years, probably time for rest, but just fantastic you've done that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to do this, that, and the other. Then the next person does the same. We just choose another person in the room. And then if you're the new person, you then say, well, why you're there. All right? So they get to know another person's version of the other people if you sort of get all that. And it's also an acknowledging thing. It doesn't take long, 15 minutes probably. But geez, I tell you what, the atmosphere is great. So, and people feel more enforced. They do know that it's not just about 2 or 3 people running the show. I mean, I have to say, look, we've got working groups. We've probably got about 45 people working on working groups pretty much the whole time. We've got 2 other social enterprises working with us in a partnership. So they've got a couple of hundred members each as well. So it's a big task in one community to keep everybody on deck. And this is one of the things that helps. It might sound a bit weird, but when people really feel confident that this is going to happen, they will do lots of things. Another thing is just about ourselves. This is the thing. If you come in here today with some expectation about what you might learn, you didn't really know what you're going to learn, but you felt certain that something would pop up. ideally, you'll leave this space today feeling better about yourself. So in what ways would you feel better? Well, one of the ways that we feel we can do something in our community about this is that often people don't involve themselves because they think they have nothing to contribute, or they don't know enough, or they're not experienced, they're not skilled. So if they can go out of every meeting that we have feeling better than when they went into it, either I know more now, they actually explained that acronym that other people have been using out there in the community for 2 years and I never knew what it was and was too afraid to ask, or whatever. So really, the sense of self and the extent to which you feel better in yourself than you did previously, sometimes even in comparison to others. We have people coming out of meetings saying, oh, gee, I can talk to my friends now about this stuff and I can feel good about the fact that I know things now that I didn't know. Don't underestimate that part, because the things that you take for granted in terms of what you know in your business, some people don't know, and they feel a little bit like they don't belong. I guess I'd just ask you a question around what have you learnt today? I'm going to actually have a non-rhetorical question here, so somebody's going to answer this. So what have you actually gained today from this morning that you can sort of take away and think, that's interesting? I hadn't thought about that before, or it's reinforced something. Yeah, just 2 words. Or understanding a board.
Just that the newly established board that I'm on is doing all the things that you guys put together, which is my first board and it's my dream opportunity, to be honest.
Beautiful.
That young people are actually desired on boards.
Yeah. Okay. What else we got? Do the work. Yeah. Yeah, I have to say, apart from all that, there's one word that's not up there that probably ought to be there, and that's persistence. All right. So it's almost assumed in our sector, I guess, but yeah, I do say to people, look, for a little while yet, we're going to have to get out of bed earlier than others, and we're going to have to go to bed a little bit later. It's just the way it is. You know, we're dealing with a council, they're full-time officers, they do all this stuff. They did ask us actually to nominate how much volunteer time had been put in, and to equate it out into dollars for something they were doing. And we sort of had a go at it, but we didn't think they'd believe more than $1 million, so we didn't say, we said 950,000. But actually, you know, over the period, you know, in terms of at a certain rate, that's what it was. But that's about persistence. It's about getting up earlier, going to bed later, sometimes just slightly. But that's what we do. All right, I just want to go back, I suppose, to one thing that I'd say about a board that if you can possibly get it. I guess it's the camaraderie. How do you actually get that passion and tone stuff to happen? What if you've got a person on your board that really just doesn't quite sort of get it? All right, maybe you've made a mistake getting them there or whatever. What if you start feeling burnt out? Do you want to declare that and then others sort of feel whatever they feel about that? I have to say, I'm down as chairman of the board. I'm currently not chairman of the board, all right? Because we had one of these, I had a board meeting a few months ago, probably 2 months ago. And we have this little round table thing. We say, so how's it for you today? How's it going? And it sort of got to me. And I actually had to confess. I said, well, actually, it's pretty rough. Which was, they said, well, in what way? I said, look, I actually can't keep doing this exactly what I'm doing now. I'm just, it's not so much I'm running out of steam, I've actually got to earn a living as well, and it's your story. So I'm just not going to be able to do this. I'm just saying in advance, and we've got this really huge project on at the moment, which actually is deadline next Friday. So anyway, eventually they just said, well, look, we'll appoint you as general manager. I said, well, I can't be chairman of the board and a general manager. Is unpaid general manager? Fine, okay. If we get some money from somewhere for a few bits and pieces, we'll do that, and that's what's happened. So essentially, I've sort of gone offline slightly, done a bit of work in that area, still doing some of my own business work as well. So it is an issue around how we manage ourselves. But if we hadn't had that little conversation that we do at the start of every board meeting, by the way, I probably wouldn't have said that then. I might have had to say it by about now because I'd have been absolutely stuffed by now. But so how open are we, and do we actually have little processes in our meetings that ensure that we are looking after each other? I think I'm done. Thank you.